You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. This is 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Last Sunday, the New York Times asked 3 people to respond to the question, is the theater important during a time of national crisis? Playwright Kenneth Lonergan responded that, quote, the theater serves as a kind of public imagination, or a place where imaginations can meet, where you can glimpse a little bit of what it might be like to be someone else. I think that is enormously valuable, he wrote, and the worse things get in the wide world, the more important that becomes. Last year, the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park commissioned Glyn O'Malley, a close associate of Edward Albee, to write a one-act play for use in the Playhouse's outreach program to schools. O'Malley's goal was to give American teens a glimpse into the lives of 2 people who are both like them in many ways, but whose life settings and experiences are very different. The play, entitled Paradise, explores the way the Middle East political, religious, and cultural conflict is reflected in a very personal way through the lives of Sarah, a 17-year-old Jewish girl who has just returned to Israel from a 5-year stay with her father in America, and Fatima, a 17-year-old Palestinian Muslim who lives in a refugee camp outside Jerusalem, along with their family and acquaintances. When the play was first read in December, it stirred a reaction among a number of people in the local Muslim community, enough for the playwright to develop a new draft for the Playhouse to delay production. The play and the response to it has sparked raises basic issues about the role of art in democratic society. And given Cincinnati's reputation for being closed to artistic experimentation, that controversy was immediately picked up by the national and international press. We will devote all of Newsmakers this morning to Paradise. 10 days ago, the 6th draft of the play was read to a nearly packed house, and we begin with snippets from Sarah and Fatima.
I want to be a photographer. At least that's what I used to tell people before I moved out from my dad's in California and came to live here in Israel with my mother. Now, I'm not so sure what I'm going to be. Northern California was beautiful. The forests, the mountains, the Pacific. It was like paradise outside of the city we lived in. I was happy there. Then my dad got a job that keeps him on the road 4 days out of every week.
And then the next person that we're going to hear from is Fatima, the Palestinian 17-year-old.
My key is writing. Words. The power of them is that they can change the simplest and the hardest things. There's a window by my desk that faces the hills and the blue, blue sky. If I squint up my eyes, I can make the walls and the barbed wire at the edge of the camp go away and only see the rolling hills of my beautiful ancient homeland. What a paradise this land could be.
To discuss Paradise, I am joined this morning by Ed Stern, the producing artistic director of the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park. Mr. Stern is in his 11th season at the Playhouse, and over a career that spans 25 years, he has directed more than 75 plays and gained a reputation as one of the most effective leaders of regional theater in the United States. Shakila Ahmad is the Director of Education for the Islamic Center of Cincinnati. She is responsible for coordinating tours and outreach presentations for the center and for visitors and the community. And Chris Jarman is the Program Director for the National Conference of Christians and Jews. Chris has an extensive experience with developing and delivering programs dealing with intergroup dynamics and diversity. She has a degree in education and experience as a classroom teacher. The NCCJ assisted the Playhouse with the public reading and discussion of Paradise last week and has agreed to assist with the preparation of curriculum materials if the play is ever produced for the schools. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Ed, let's start. What was the inspiration for this? Because this is a play that the Playhouse commissioned.
Yes.
It wasn't already existing out there.
That's
and you
correct.
Found it. What was the inspiration?
Well, I have to step back and as quick a snippet as possible, make it clear we have a very aggressive school touring and outreach program. Last season we were seen by over 80,000 school kids. And we have a history of doing shows that have relevance and resonance in young people's lives. Last year, with the racial tensions in town, we did a play of Anna Devere Smith's called Fires in the Mirror, which was about a race riot, an actual race riot, a docudrama from Brooklyn. We just finished a play called The Wrestling Season, which was about rumor and sexual identity in high school kids.
Were these plays that already existed in the market?
They already existed.
Okay.
But there are not a lot of them. And so several years ago, the Playhouse in the Park got into the business of commissioning solid playwrights across the country to develop plays that young people could feel addresses their issues. We've had a play called Face to Face, which was about urban myths and growing up. We had a play about the orphan train and about split families and today. And last spring, Bert Goldstein, the director of education and programming, came to me with an idea of what would it be like to have a play that views war through the eyes of young people. And I thought that was a very exciting idea. It was based on a Newsweek article and cover that many people may remember, which showed two 17-year girls, one Palestinian, one Israeli, who both were killed. And that was the basis of a story which is certainly more fiction than fact, but using that, we commissioned Glyn O'Malley, a prestigious New York playwright, to write a play that would examine war through the eyes of young people.
Okay. So this is part of a much larger process.
Exactly.
And there was this spark. I have to say, on the one hand, I'm a historian and try to write about people all the time and know there's huge holes. But I'm also a lover of the theater. And one of the things theater allows you to do is write about people in ways that historians can't, because you don't have to just stick with what you know. You can fill in the blanks. Shakila, you saw this play read for the first time in February 18th. Is that correct?
That's correct. The reading at the Playhouse on the 18th was the one I attended.
Okay, you were not there in the December
No,
reading.
I was not.
What was your reaction? Now, I'm not talking about to all the controversy. I'm talking about what was your personal reaction to the play as you saw it read on February 18th? And I was at that same reading.
Right. My personal reaction was one that the play is an extremely powerful and a very provocative play. It covers a very intense, overpowering subject matter. It is one that, you know, in today's world, to some degree, has relevancy in terms of it covers something that is very much on a lot of people's mind. I think, as a whole, the way that the play was presented, and I commend Mr. O'Malley for, you know, covering, wanting to cover, and the Playhouse for wanting to cover such a complex issue. The emotions overtook, I think, initially almost all aspects of me, in terms of it was extremely painful. There was suffering that came through, there was intensity that came through, there was anger that came through, and there was a lot of confusion that came through. So, you know, on a personal level, you know, that's candidly what I felt, and I've heard those reiterated by a variety of people.
Okay, and we'll come back and look at some of those in more depth as we go along. Chris, you work a lot with students in this city and in this region, not just through theater, not primarily, but NCCJ does all sorts of things. Are these sorts of the issues that are addressed, that Ed has talked about, that they wanted to address, Shakila talked about, that came through, are these issues that are on young people's minds?
Yes. It has always amazed me that our young people are probably much more truthful and honest and willing to engage in the conversations that take us as adults maybe another 5 or 6 years to even get comfortable doing. And this is a reality for many of them. Many of your young people are now saying, what happens if there's a draft and I have to go to war? You know, so I mean, they're talking about this. They're talking about issues of hopelessness, and you know, we are in such a culture of violence. They want to talk about these things, and you know, looking at, you as adults really didn't give us a whole lot of things to be hopeful about. And I think so that any way that we can present a way for the dialogue to begin, is really good, and our kids really love art. We did a whole series of programming last year around various forms of art, and the dialogues were incredible that followed.
Glyn O'Malley, one of the questions has been, yes, he's a well-known playwright, but he's neither Palestinian nor Jewish. He's, I guess, from his ethnically, his background is Irish. I have no idea.
I actually have no idea either.
Yeah, and it's like me being Hurley. I have no consciousness of being Irish at all. But what a terrible thing to say in March, right? But anyway, was that a problem? Was that an advantage? Was that a concern of yours?
No, actually. Many years ago, I was at a national theater conference with, one of the great world playwrights, Arthur Fugard from South Africa. And he gave this extraordinary speech. And at the end, someone got up and asked him critically, did he feel as a white Afrikaner, South African, that he had the right to write black people and black voices on stage? And that what gave him that right? And his response, and I'm so inarticulate compared to Mr. Fugard, was that as an artist, using his imagination, he has every right to write voices for black people, for women, for people that are not under his skin, and that as a viewer, that gentleman has every right to critique the show after it's written. But he's saying, please don't, shortchange me as an artist, and saying because I am not black or I am not a woman, I have no right to do that. And I feel we as artists have to give that to other experienced artists, that if they can be open in their imagination, they can come up with a compelling work.
As you listened and watched the play on the 18th, did you think that, despite the background of the author, that it reflected the realities of Palestinian Muslim life as you understood it? Was it fair?
I'll start with making a comment in the sense that I agree with what Mr. Stern has said. I don't think you have to be Palestinian to understand the Palestinian point of view. You don't have to experience the Holocaust to empathize and understand that perspective and be able to write about it. I will say, in regards to the play, there was an attempt by Mr. O'Malley to show two perspectives. But the voice that came through, and the voice that I'm hearing, not just from Muslims, not just from Palestinians, but a variety of people who have been close to the situation, either having physically been there or really doing the research, the reading, the work, is that the Palestinian voice was not a Palestinian voice. It did not get to the heart of what the Palestinian plight and suffering is. I mean, and to some degree, the Israeli perspective was not comprehensive of the complete Israeli or Jewish experience.
Well, isn't that the problem, though, of theater, that it deals with the particular and not the general? You know, political scientists and historians try to deal with the big thing, but theater deals with two people, and they don't stand for everybody.
Absolutely, and the particular topic deals with more than just those two individuals. It deals with a very complex issue, and trying to get to the issue of helping kids understand the effect of war. And in doing that, you have to be a little bit more comprehensive and do a little bit more research and understanding.
Go ahead.
Can I just point out, I think one of the difficulties of sort of presenting a play, and that's one of the reasons we had an assistant principal speak after the play is part of a fuller context that adults don't get to see. They don't get to see the comprehensive study guide that we work with teachers to discuss prior to seeing the play, which would have far more the background that you're suggesting. I agree with you. I think it's important. If it's simply a 55, 60-minute play and we leave, we're not doing justice to the difficulty. We have a follow-up discussion, and we have discussions for teachers to do in the classrooms following. So the play is sort of the lever to move all of these discussions about.
I unfortunately have to take a break, but we're going to come back and continue this in just a minute. Stay right there. Stay tuned. After the break, we'll focus on what Ed was just talking about, the appropriateness of this play for high school audiences. Welcome back. I want to correct something I said right at the beginning. Chris Jarman is with the NCCJ. That's correct. But the proper name of the organization is the National Conference for Community and Justice. And Chris, I apologize. And Chip Harrod, I will take him out to lunch to apologize. You know, one of the things, we were talking about voices, and before we get off the content of this, one of the things that struck me as a person, I was going in expecting to see a duality. You know, Palestinian, Israeli, Muslim, Jew. That's what I was expecting. What I was surprised at in the play, and what I found fascinating, especially thinking about using it as a teacher, was that there was a third voice in there, and that was the American voice. Because Sarah had just returned from Israel after spending 5 years in America, and she has a very American perspective, and Fatima is being visited by her cousin, who has lived in America, in New York City, for 10 years, and he is this other, so there's this third, this is not just two-sided, this is multi-sided, and I thought that was a real hook for potential students. Did that interest you?
Well, I think the American perspective was, I'm sure, intentionally added in order to be able to relate to American audiences, and so, and to some ways that came out loud and clear. I mean, in talking with colleagues and friends who attended, yes, that I believe that was a necessity. And you know, we can talk about specifics as to how effective or how accurate or whatever, but I think the issue that I really want to have us look at is, in terms of the appropriateness, as you started to talk about for high school kids, is that we need the study guides, we need the vehicles with any kind of an intense educational tool, but the tool must be able to stand on its own. It must not provide information as a result of what it provides. It cannot provide incorrect information in the sense, and the way that things are presented, there's a very, very serious potential for providing erroneous information.
Well, before we get to, and I'm going to ask you about this version of the play, but in December there was a reading, and there were some changes made between that version of the play and the play that was presented, the version that was presented in February. Very concretely, what were some of the changes that were made based on the reaction of people who heard that reading in December? Well,
some were small, some were larger in nature. We decided that Fatima's cousin would be coming back from America. He would, in the original, in the 5th draft, he was a Palestinian who wanted to go to America. Okay. That certainly was a large change. There were other smaller ones in nature. I should point out that what people heard on that particular reading was the 6th draft. We would have assumed the show would have gotten to an 8th draft
before it was produced.
So the draft process is part of the process of any new play.
What still in the 6th draft, very concretely now, do you think is not fair?
Well, I think that there's 3 basic issues. Is, from a Muslim point of view, is, you know, someone who deals with thousands of kids and thousands of adults every year in trying to educate them on a complex topic, is the fact that the way, from 2 things, from the title of Paradise to the fact that this is about a suicide bombing. We can, you know, say our objective is to educate children on war, but the topic that leaves with the children, adults, whoever, is that this is about a suicide bombing. So the association, indirectly or directly, of Paradise with that suicide bombing is extremely offensive and very incorrect in terms of the basic teachings of Islam.
But are you saying that a play could not be constructed where there is a suicide bombing?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying, and what I think, you know, educators, and I'm not a theologian, nor am I a political analyst, is that if it's going to be covered, there must be a voice that allows whoever the audience is to understand that this element exists, as the KKK uses the Bible, as David Koresh does not speak all of Christianity.
Yeah, what about that?
Well, let me just throw in something. Sure. I think there's a good illustration here, because in our earlier conversations, which goes to the study guide and how we facilitate, the fact that the Fires in the Mirror was very successful and very well received. And I think the logical assumption then is, okay, that's around a current event, a social justice issue, and so if that worked, why doesn't this? A couple of things. For most teachers, talking about the issues of race and racism, especially those of us who are baby boomers in our 40s and 50s, that's our history. We lived the civil rights. We see that, and we know within our community that's a reality. We just finished Black History Month. We know that there's tons of material. So that is something that I can work with, that's very familiar, that's very known to me. It's part of our history. We struggle with it all the time. So that's a piece. To translate that, what is our collective experience? Probably 90 to 95% of the audience that the Playhouse does serve does not know firsthand anyone who is Jewish or of the Islamic faith. Our experience is 9/11. Well, and so I think there are some contrasts there that we need to really be probably more self-analytical
on that point specifically,
about that.
I talked to 3 teachers in the last couple of days, 3 teachers I respect, all English teachers, and one of the questions I asked them was, do they follow the news? Do your students follow the news? Do they have anything to bring in background? And every one of them said they had absolutely no doubt that their students were much better informed than many of their parents, and that they had that was not a worry for them.
And I will say that that's from the media. That's not knowing Shakila. That is not going out to
that's not knowing
living
the Muslim
with.
community.
And so I think it is still very different because most of us do have experience.
Well, it's
with
different,
people,
but does that mean we cannot ever deal with things that we see every day in the
we
media, but we
deal
don't
with
have
it.
Personal relationship to?
I think we need to be very careful.
Yeah, but Shakila seems to be suggesting that since many people, I would suggest lots of people do know individually Muslims and Jews,
right.
But that you can't ever deal with that?
No, as I said, you absolutely can, and to some degree you must deal with it, but you must be able to present the perspective that this is a voice that exists. This is not the mainstream voice. This is not the conscious voice. This is not the correct voice, and there is no voice. Not that it's not loud and clear and it's not overwhelming and it's not the majority.
That some people in the Jewish community have said is that Fatima has been cleaned up in the sense that Glyn O'Malley's mistake is that he turns it into a political, social, economic issue rather than into jihad. And so some people in the Jewish community says he's being too nice to Palestinians. Now that's another perspective.
For every argument we've gotten that the play does not fulfill showing Muslims in the correct light, we've gotten the same weight showing that we do not show the Israeli experience. We've certainly, Weekly Standard has said the play is pro-Palestinian. That's a national magazine. Wow. Now, I question that. I'm not agreeing with that. But what I'm saying is we get this from both sides. And the interesting thing is, I find it interesting, I've said at the reading, and I still believe that young people get this play better than adults do.
Okay, I'm aware of time. We've got less than 2 minutes. Let me ask a couple of things. Where do we go from here? Where do you want the Playhouse to go from here?
Well, I think there's been a complete breakdown of communication, from the 16th in terms of the people that were involved at that point and the Playhouse. I think the communication has been reestablished, and the Playhouse, I think, needs to communicate with all of the parties involved in order to be able to provide something that is truly of educational value and truly, serves a need in the community. I think in order to be able to do that, it requires commitment, resources, and open ears on all sides of the equation.
Ed, where do we go from here? Less than a minute.
I think if we do a show, I think that dialogue would be important to fashioning the study guides and the discussion following the play. I don't think it would be helping by committee to write a play, but everything around it, absolutely.
What's the likelihood at this point that this play will ever be produced?
I think it's reasonable at this juncture.
For adults or for students?
No, for students.
For students. Chris, very quickly, where do we go from here?
We have committed both to all the parties, and I think that's the way we are seen, especially working with a study guide and in providing facilitators, because this is probably not a topic that a lot of people are familiar with. So we'll be part of the process all the way.
Thank you very much for being here this morning. I hope we have at least opened this up for the audience, and obviously this is an ongoing discussion, not an over discussion, a completed discussion. Thank you. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.